Lavrov's remarks are being closely watched across the region, according to international coverage and official reactions. Russia's top diplomat has addressed the Taiwan issue directly, framing Taiwan as a non-negotiable issue for Moscow, according to TASS. Russian Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov has declared that Moscow opposes any form of independence for Taiwan. In remarks published by Russia's state news agency TASS, Lavrov said the Kremlin's position is well known, unchangeable, and repeatedly reaffirmed at the highest level. Lavrov said Russia recognizes Taiwan as an integral part of China and opposes any attempt to alter that status. He described the Taiwan issue as an internal matter for the People's Republic of China, stating that Beijing has every legitimate basis to defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Supporters of Beijing may read this as a stronger signal, but it's still a diplomatic statement, not a military move. Addressing the possibility of rising tensions in the Taiwan Strait, Lavrov said Russia backs China's position on unity and territorial integrity, according to TASS. He pointed to the long-standing friendship treaty between Moscow and Beijing, first signed more than 2 decades ago in 2001 and extended in 2021, as the basis for this position. According to Anadolu Agency, Lavrov emphasized that Taiwan is a Chinese internal affair and that Moscow backs Beijing's position on territorial unity. This alignment between Russia and China represents a significant development in diplomatic terms. U.S. officials and analysts may see this as added diplomatic pressure, but coordination levels can't be independently verified. For Beijing, it means having Moscow's stated backing at a moment when tensions over Taiwan are in focus. Lavrov also turned his focus to Japan, accusing Tokyo of embarking on a course of accelerated militarization. He warned that such actions could have a detrimental impact on regional stability, urging Japan to carefully weigh its decisions amid an increasingly volatile security environment. From Moscow's perspective, Japan's military expansion represents a concerning development, one that could affect regional dynamics in the Asia-Pacific. The Russian criticism comes as Japan's cabinet has approved a record defense budget plan and is expanding funding for missiles and unmanned systems. According to AP, Lavrov's warning reflects the broader Russia-China view that Western allies, particularly the United States and Japan, are driving military competition in the region. Against this backdrop, Japan's cabinet has approved a record defense budget plan exceeding 9 trillion yen, approximately $58 billion. According to the Japan Times, this represents a 9.4% increase and marks the first time Japan's defense budget plan has exceeded 9 trillion yen. The spending plan aims to strengthen strike-back capabilities, coastal defenses, long-range missiles, and unmanned systems, marking a shift from Japan's post-war security posture. AP says Japan is on track to meet its 2% of GDP defense spending target. Japanese officials describe this as strictly the absolute minimum necessary, given what they call the most severe and complex security environment since the war. The scale of Japan's military transformation is significant, and Japan says it's moving toward 2% of GDP under its multi-year plan, according to AP, a target that NATO has long encouraged its members to meet and one that represents a historic departure for a country that has maintained limits on military power since World War II. According to AP News, the budget plan includes 970 billion yen, approximately $6.2 billion. Specifically for missiles, including 177 Type 12 missiles worth $1.13 billion. This is not incremental change. This is a fundamental reorientation of Japan's defense posture, from a strictly defensive capability to one that includes substantial strike-back options. For China and Russia, this represents exactly the kind of militarization they have warned against. The Japan Times reports that a key focus of the new budget plan is developing standoff missiles with a range of 1,000 kilometers, weapons designed for potential contingencies in Japan's southwest, where any Taiwan conflict would likely unfold. According to Mainichi, the budget also includes 100 billion yen, approximately $640 million, for drone defense shields and 10 billion yen, about $64 million, for developing Japan's domestic arms industry and expanding exports. Japan is accelerating missile development, expanding joint weapons programs with Western partners, and easing arms export restrictions that have been in place for decades. This represents a historic departure from Japan's post-war self-imposed limits on military power, driven, according to Tokyo, by rising tensions with China and alignment with Washington. Tensions escalated after Japan's Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi said a Taiwan conflict could trigger a survival-threatening scenario for Japan, according to Reuters and PBS. Beijing urged its citizens to avoid travel to Japan, and the dispute spilled into culture and business pressure, according to Reuters. Japan's position is that Taiwan's security is linked to Japan's security. The Taiwan Strait is close to Japanese territory, and any conflict there would affect Japanese interests. For Beijing, these statements represent interference in what China considers an internal matter, and a sign that Japan is aligning with Washington's approach to the region. Japanese officials have been careful to frame the military buildup as defensive and necessary. Defense officials stated, "This budget is strictly the absolute minimum necessary as our nation faces the most severe and complex security environment since the war to fully uphold Japan's defense. And it will not in the least alter the three non-nuclear principles, the commitment to exclusively defensive defense, or Japan's path as a peaceful nation." Officials also pushed back against criticism of the buildup, saying there is an information war specifically intended to create the impression that only Japan is pushing for military buildup by completely ignoring the severe regional environment surrounding Japan and the military strengthening of neighboring countries. They emphasized the need to continue clearly explaining these points and said the budgets clearly express the national will of the Japanese government, both domestically and internationally. Meanwhile, China has announced a fresh round of sanctions against U.S. defense-linked entities and individuals, escalating tensions with Washington over American arms sales to Taiwan. According to Reuters and the South China Morning Post, China's foreign ministry said the measures target 20 U.S. defense companies and 10 individuals connected to them. 30 entities in total, citing what Beijing describes as repeated violations of its core interests. The sanctions freeze any assets the listed companies or individuals hold within China and prohibit Chinese organizations and citizens from engaging in business with them. China's foreign ministry said the named individuals are banned from entering the country and the companies face transaction limits. Beijing's move came days after Washington approved an arms package for Taiwan. Reuters reported the U.S. approved an $11.1 billion package described as the largest ever for Taiwan. The announcement drew sharp criticism from Chinese officials, who see any military support for Taiwan as a direct challenge to China's sovereignty claims. A Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson stated, "The U.S. openly announced a major arms deal to Taiwan, seriously violating the One China principle and the three joint communiques and undermining China's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. This gravely jeopardizes the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait and sends a seriously mistaken and dangerous signal to Taiwan independent separatist forces. China firmly opposes and strongly condemns this." Among the firms sanctioned are Northrop Grumman Systems Corporation, L3 Harris Maritime Services, and Boeing St. Louis-based defense unit, which focuses primarily on military and security-related work. According to Al Jazeera, the Boeing sanctions are particularly notable given China's historical importance as a customer for Boeing's civilian aircraft. Reuters previously reported that Boeing has been in discussions to sell up to 500 commercial jets to Chinese airlines, a deal that would mark a significant breakthrough amid prolonged U.S.-China trade tensions. By sanctioning Boeing's defense division, China is drawing a line between military and commercial activities, though the move still sends a signal about the potential consequences of supporting Taiwan militarily. According to Euronews, among those sanctioned is Palmer Luckey, the founder of defense technology firm Anduril Industries, along with 9 senior executives from the affected companies. Luckey, who previously founded the virtual reality company Oculus before selling it to Facebook, has become a prominent figure in the U.S. defense technology sector. Reports say Anduril is a major U.S. defense contractor. Any direct supply links to Taiwan were not independently confirmed in the sanctions announcement. By targeting Luckey personally and barring him from entering China, Beijing is sending a message to the American defense industry about consequences for executives at companies involved in Taiwan-related sales. The Chinese Foreign Ministry was explicit about what Taiwan represents in U.S.-China relations. The Taiwan issue is the core of China's core interests and the first red line that cannot be crossed in China-U.S. relations, a spokesperson said in a statement carried by state media. The spokesperson warned that any actions crossing that line would be met with a strong response and urged the United States to halt what Beijing called dangerous efforts to arm the island. This framing, Taiwan as the first red line, according to Beijing, indicates that China views this issue as more important than any other source of tension with Washington. Chinese officials went further in their criticism of Taiwan's government and U.S. policy. Taiwan's separatist forces seek independence and resist reunification through military means, lavishly wasting the public's hard-earned money on weapons, not hesitating to turn Taiwan into a powder keg, the spokesperson said. This cannot avert the inevitable demise of Taiwan independence, but will only accelerate pushing the Taiwan Strait towards the brink of war. The spokesperson added, the U.S. side's use of force to aid Taiwan's independence will only backfire, and the strategy of using Taiwan to contain China will absolutely not succeed. This rhetoric reflects Beijing's consistent position that U.S. arms sales increase rather than decrease the risk of conflict by encouraging what China describes as separatist forces in Taiwan. Responding to Beijing's announcement, a spokesperson for the U.S. State Department said Washington strongly objects to China's sanctions. The spokesperson noted that the U.S. policy of providing Taiwan with defensive capabilities has remained consistent across 9 different U.S. administrations and contributes to regional stability. The official also criticized China's broader pressure campaign against Taiwan, calling on Beijing to reduce military, diplomatic, and economic coercion and instead pursue meaningful dialogue with Taipei. This reflects the long-standing U.S. position that arms sales to Taiwan are defensive in nature and help preserve peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, even though they have been a flashpoint in U.S.-China relations for decades. It's worth understanding the legal framework that governs U.S.-Taiwan relations. China maintains that Taiwan, which is democratically governed, is part of its territory, a claim firmly rejected by authorities in Taipei. The United States, while not formally recognizing Taiwan as a sovereign state, is legally obligated under the Taiwan Relations Act to provide the island with defensive weapons. This creates an inherent tension. The U.S. maintains a one-China policy that acknowledges Beijing's position, but simultaneously provides billions in weapons to Taiwan, which Beijing considers a renegade province. For Beijing, this is inconsistent. For Washington, it's a carefully calibrated policy designed to maintain stability without provoking conflict. Reuters cited analysts who called the sanctions largely symbolic due to limited exposure. American defense contractors have faced restrictions on doing business in China for years, precisely because of national security concerns about technology transfer and intelligence risks. So freezing assets that largely don't exist and banning business relationships that largely aren't happening has limited practical impact. But the symbolic value matters. The sanctions signal Beijing's displeasure and serve as a warning about the potential consequences of continued arms sales. And the Boeing case shows that China is willing to link commercial and military activities, potentially threatening billions in civilian aircraft sales to pressure the U.S. on Taiwan. From Moscow's stated backing of Beijing to Tokyo's defense expansion, regional dynamics in the Asia-Pacific are shifting. The region is entering what some analysts describe as a more volatile phase, marked by rising military competition and sharper geopolitical divides. On one side, the United States, Japan, and other allies increasingly focused on Taiwan contingencies and building military capabilities. On the other side, China, with Russia's diplomatic statements of support, maintaining that Taiwan is an internal matter and warning against foreign interference. The middle ground appears to be narrowing, and the military preparations on various sides are intensifying. And Lavrov's statement on Taiwan should be understood in the context of broader Russia-China diplomatic alignment. The two countries have deepened their strategic partnership in recent years, driven by shared opposition to what they describe as U.S. hegemony and Western interference in their respective spheres of influence. For Russia, supporting China diplomatically on Taiwan gains Beijing's continued cooperation on issues that matter more to Moscow, including support regarding Ukraine and Western sanctions. For China, having Russia's stated backing on Taiwan strengthens its diplomatic position. There's no public commitment that Russia would intervene militarily in a Taiwan conflict. The confirmed piece here is diplomatic messaging per TASS. Japan finds itself navigating a difficult position. As a U.S. ally with a mutual defense treaty, Japan is increasingly focused on the Taiwan question. Its geographic proximity means any Taiwan conflict would directly affect Japanese territory and interests. But Japan also has significant economic ties with China and has historically sought to maintain stable relations with Beijing, even while allied with Washington. The current trajectory, expanded defense spending, development of strike capabilities, statements about Taiwan threatening Japan's survival, represents a choice to prioritize security alignment with the U.S. Beijing's retaliatory measures, travel advisories, economic pressure show that China is prepared to impose costs for this choice. What we're witnessing has characteristics of competitive military dynamics. Japan cites Chinese military buildup as the reason for its own military expansion. China cites U.S. arms sales to Taiwan and Japanese rearmament as threats requiring response. The U.S. cites Chinese military activities as justification for supporting Taiwan. Each side frames its actions as defensive responses to the other's activities. Each side views itself as acting reasonably in the face of genuine concerns. But the result is an upward trend of military spending, capability development, and rhetorical intensity, with no clear mechanism to reverse the trend. Taiwan itself, and the democratic island of 24 million people at the center of this dispute, has limited ability to shape these dynamics. Taipei welcomes U.S. arms sales as essential to its defense. It welcomes Japan's statements about shared security interests. It appreciates any international support for its democratic system. But Taiwan also faces the reality that it cannot match China's military capabilities, no matter how many weapons it acquires. Its security ultimately depends on whether the United States and its allies would intervene in a conflict, a question that remains strategically ambiguous by design. For ordinary Taiwanese citizens, the intensifying great power competition creates uncertainty about their island's future. The Taiwan issue doesn't exist in isolation from broader economic competition. The sanctions on U.S. defense companies, the potential impact on Boeing's commercial aircraft sales, the restrictions on technology transfer, all of this connects to the wider U.S.-China economic rivalry. Taiwan itself is critical to the global economy as the world's leading producer of advanced semiconductors. Any conflict there would affect global technology supply chains. This economic interdependence is both a source of stability, giving all sides reasons to avoid conflict, and a potential pressure point, as we see with China's sanctions and economic measures. One aspect of the current situation is the question of whether diplomatic channels are adequate to manage these tensions. U.S.-China communication has improved in recent months, with military-to-military contacts resuming after a long pause, but the fundamental disagreements remain unresolved. The Taiwan Relations Act commits the U.S. to providing defensive weapons. China considers this a violation of its sovereignty. There's no obvious compromise position. Similarly, Japan's defense expansion is framed as non-negotiable given security concerns, but Beijing views it as provocative. Again, no clear path to resolution. In the absence of diplomatic solutions, military deterrence becomes the primary tool. But deterrence can fail, especially if one side miscalculates the other's intentions or resolve. Lavrov's statement matters because it clarifies Russia's stated position at a moment when regional attention is heightened. If there were any doubt about whether Moscow would diplomatically side with Beijing on Taiwan, that doubt has been addressed. Russia opposes Taiwanese independence in any form and supports China's stated right to defend its territorial integrity, according to TASS. There's no public commitment that Russia would intervene militarily, but it does mean Russia would likely provide diplomatic cover and oppose international measures against China over Taiwan. For U.S. strategists, this means considering a scenario where action on Taiwan faces diplomatic opposition from both Beijing and Moscow. Some analysts warn that the region is entering a more volatile phase. The combination of factors, Russia-China diplomatic alignment, Japanese defense expansion, record U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, escalating rhetoric on various sides, creates conditions where miscalculation becomes a concern. The Taiwan Strait has been a potential flashpoint for decades, but the current dynamics are intensifying attention on the risks. Each side is building capabilities, each side is signaling resolve, and each side is taking positions that leave limited room for compromise. The question is whether this deterrence approach will preserve peace, or whether the escalating competition will eventually produce the conflict everyone claims to want to avoid. We are at a significant moment in Asia-Pacific geopolitics. Russia's foreign minister has declared support for China's position on Taiwan, citing the Moscow-Beijing Friendship Treaty in opposition to any form of Taiwanese independence, according to TASS. Japan's cabinet has approved a record defense budget plan of approximately $58 billion. AP says Japan is on track to meet its 2% of GDP defense target, with a focus on missiles, drones, and strike capabilities. China has sanctioned 20 U.S. defense companies and 10 executives in response to what Reuters reported as the largest ever U.S. arms sale to Taiwan, $11.1 billion in weapons. Beijing called Taiwan the first red line that cannot be crossed in U.S.-China relations. Washington says its policy has been consistent across 9 administrations. Tokyo says its military buildup is the absolute minimum necessary. Regional dynamics in the Asia-Pacific are shifting. Military competition is intensifying. Diplomatic space appears to be narrowing. What happens next depends on decisions yet to be made in Washington, Beijing, Tokyo, Taipei, and Moscow. The world is watching, and the stakes are significant.